Grandmother, did you send this?
She didn't come to beg. She didn't come to explain herself. She
Grandmother,
walked into the
did you send
KH
this?
Group boardroom with his secret baby strapped to her chest, signed divorce papers in one hand, and a sealed legal letter in the other. A letter his own family had sent to silence her 11 months ago, before he ever knew she was pregnant. She placed everything on that table, in front of him, in front of his board, in front of every person the Kang family had spent 3 decades carefully positioning in that room. Then she waited. Now here is the part nobody in that building saw coming. Kang Taeju read that letter. Then he picked up his phone, put it on speaker, and called his grandmother, in front of everyone. "Grandmother, did you send this?" When she said yes, he fired his grandmother's most trusted director on the spot, cleared the entire boardroom, and turned to face the woman he had lost. What happened in that room next is something nobody who was there will ever forget. And it started with a black woman who refused to let his family rewrite her story. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now. Would you have walked into that boardroom? Or would you have stayed silent and let the lawyers handle it? I want to know where you stand before you hear what she had to lose by going in. There is a version of this story where Essenam never walks into that boardroom, where she stays in her apartment, puts her daughter down for a nap, makes herself a cup of tea, and lets the lawyers finish what the marriage could not. Where she accepts that some doors close permanently and the dignified thing, the safe thing, is to walk away from them without looking back and build something new from what is left. She had considered that version. She had held it in her hands for 11 months, turned it over, examined every angle of it, tested its weight. Then she put it down. Because Esinam had not left everything she knew at 24 years old, had not built a life from a suitcase and a scholarship and the kind of sheer refusal that people from the outside call ambition and people who have lived it call survival. She had not done all of that just to let a family she never chose write the final sentence of her story. But before we get to that boardroom, before we get to the document wallet and the sealed letter and the 11 executives who stopped breathing at the same moment, you need to understand who Esinam actually is, not the version Kang Taeju's family decided she was. Not the version that got quietly filed away in the KH Group legal records as a liability to be managed. The real version, the one that starts in Accra, in a house full of love and short on almost everything else, with a girl who learned before she was 10 years old that the world did not hand you the life you deserved. You went and got it yourself, or you did not get it at all. That girl is how this story begins. And that girl is why this story ends the way it does. Esinam's mother was a seamstress. Her father drove a shared taxi 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when the money required it, which was most weeks. They lived in a neighborhood in Accra where everyone knew everyone and nobody had very much, and the community was held together by the particular warmth of people who understand that the person next to them is managing the same weight. Her parents were not poor in the way that breaks people permanently. They were poor in the way that teaches you things. Hard things. Useful things. The kind of things you cannot learn in a classroom no matter how good the school is. Isi learned them early. She was the kind of child who made adults pause mid-sentence, not because she was loud. She was not loud. Because she was precise. She could walk into a room and within 5 minutes understand the conversation beneath the conversation, the thing everyone was circling without naming. She could read what people were not saying, faster than most people read what they were. Her mother called it a gift. Her teachers called it unsettling, which is what teachers say about children who are not contained by the lesson plan. Essie called it useful, and kept developing it because everything useful deserved to be developed. She worked for the scholarship, not casually, not with the effort of someone who expects things to arrive, with the focus of someone who understands that this particular door opens once and closes if you are not ready. She was ready. She got the letter at 17. One page, one paragraph that changed the shape of everything. She read it standing at the kitchen counter before her parents were awake, and she cried once, quietly, into the collar of her school uniform. Then she folded the letter, put it on the kitchen table, and went to wake her mother. Her mother cried for 20 minutes. Then she went to work because the seams were not going to sew themselves, and joy, like grief, had to be picked up and carried forward, or it would just sit on the floor getting in the way. That is where Isi came from. That is the material she was made of before Seoul ever entered the picture. She arrived in South Korea at 24 with one large suitcase. Korean she had been teaching herself for 2 years through every app and podcast and late-night study session she could find, and the absolute, unshakable certainty that she was not going to be invisible in any room she walked into. Not because she was arrogant, because she had watched what invisibility cost people her whole life, and she had made a decision about that cost. It was too high. She was not paying it. Seoul in those first months was difficult in the way that any new city is difficult when you are building from zero, multiplied by the specific texture of being a Black woman in a country where the professional standard and the beauty standard and the social standard had been constructed without anyone who looked like her in the room. She was not naive about this. She had researched it before she arrived. Research and living are different things, but the research meant the living did not surprise her, which gave her an advantage she used every single day. She built her career the way she built everything, precisely, persistently, without waiting for a room to invite her in, and without burning down the rooms that resisted her, because burning things down felt good for exactly one moment, and then you were standing in ash and still had work to do. She learned which battles required a public confrontation and which ones required her to become so undeniably competent that the resistance became embarrassing for the person offering it. She got very good at both. By 28, she was creative director at Tono Beauty, a Korean skincare brand that had recently understood, not from goodness, from market research, that there was an entire global population whose skin it had never considered, and that this was both a moral failure and a significant business opportunity. Essie was brought in to fix it. She was the first Black woman to hold the creative director title at Tono, and she held it with the energy of someone who understood that she was not just doing a job, she was making a door that had not existed before, and someone behind her was going to walk through it, and that person deserved to find it already open. The work was not comfortable. It was never comfortable. It was the work of sitting in rooms full of very smart people who had spent their entire careers not thinking about something and making them think about it without allowing them the comfortable exit of defensiveness. She did not allow defensiveness. She allowed it with data, with product results, with market numbers, with the kind of evidence that made the argument so costly to ignore that ignoring it became the less intelligent choice. She was very good at this. She was also, outside of all of it, genuinely in love with Seoul. Not the KH group Seoul. Not the Gangnam luxury private members club Seoul she would later be pulled into through marriage. The real Seoul. The Han River in the early morning, the Pojang matcha tents at night with their orange glow, and the smell of food and the sound of the city decompressing, the neighborhoods that tourists did not visit. The particular quality of the light in autumn when the ginkgo trees turn yellow all at once, as if they discussed it and agreed. She had built a life here, a real one, chosen deliberately, belonging to her. This is important. Remember this. Because when everything broke later, the question was not just what she lost, it was what she had built that could not be taken away. And the answer to that question is what carried her through. She met Kang Taeju on a Thursday evening in October. She was not looking for him. And what happened in the next 8 months would either be the best decision of her life or the setup for the most devastating betrayal she would ever face. She met him in a corridor, a private members club in Gangnam. Tono product launch dinner. She was checking the lighting rig. This was her job. The whole evening was her job. And she did her job completely, which meant she was in the back corridor near the lighting panel while the guests were filing into the main room. A man walked past her going entirely the wrong direction. She told him the main room was the other way. He said he knew. She said she also knew. And she was going this way first because the lighting panel was this way, and if he wanted to continue in the wrong direction, that was entirely his business. He stopped. He looked at her. Not with the particular expression she had learned to clock in certain Korean professional spaces, the fraction of a second too long look that communicated a recalibration they had not expected to need. Not that. Just looked at her the way a person looks when they hear a sentence they did not predict from someone they did not expect to find interesting. Then he laughed, and this is the detail. The laugh was real. Not a networking laugh, not the polished, calibrated, this is how I present in rooms like this version. The laugh of someone who had forgotten, for one unguarded second, to manage how they appeared. She heard the difference immediately. She always heard that difference. She went to the lighting panel. She did not think about him again until after the dinner when he crossed the room toward her himself, not sending someone, not orchestrating an introduction, just walking over. She noted this. He said the presentation was exceptional. She said the product was exceptional, and the presentation was just honest about it. He asked for her number. She gave him hers instead and told him she would call if she decided to. She called him 4 days later. 4 days was the right distance between impulse and decision. Long enough to confirm she still wanted to call. Short enough that calling still felt like choosing rather than managing. Their first conversation lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. She looked up at some point and the number surprised her. He asked her real questions, not the social taxonomy questions of Seoul professional circles. Real ones. What made her angry? What she thought about when she could not sleep? Whether she believed people could fundamentally change or just learn to better manage who they already were. She answered honestly. She did not have another mode available, and something in the quality of his attention made her feel that honesty was what was actually being requested. She called Abina afterward. Abina. Best friend since 14. School bench in Accra. Now a corporate compliance officer in Seoul with opinions about everything and apologies for none of them. Essie said, I met someone. Abina said, Korean? Essie said, yes. Abina said, does he know what he is getting into? Essie said, not entirely. Abina said, good. Let him find out at a pace that gives him time to decide he is not frightened. They dated for 8 months. 8 months is enough time to see someone in their ordinary moments, not just their best ones. Enough time to learn the difference between who someone is trying to be and who they are when they have stopped trying. Taiju, in those 8 months, was the man she had heard in the laugh in the corridor. Present, curious, honest about the extraordinary privilege he had grown up inside, and honest about not confusing it with merit. He was not performing humility. He was just accurate about how things worked, and that accuracy made space for her to be accurate back. And that exchange was the foundation of what they built. He proposed on her kitchen floor. Not at a restaurant, not with an audience. Just the two of them and Abina's residual furniture chaos, and the ordinary evening of a shared life they had been quietly assembling. He said, I know this is fast. He said, I know there is a version of my life where this is complicated. He said, I do not care about that version. He did not have a ring. He got one the next day, walked into a shop himself, chose it with his own eyes for his own reasons. Essie found out about this 3 weeks later from his assistant in passing. She filed it immediately under. Evidence that the man she had said yes to was real. She said yes from the floor of her own apartment, with full information, with clear eyes. Remember that too. The wedding was small. They both wanted small. His family did not want small. The Kang family does not do small. The Kang family does occasions that communicate power and position and permanence. Halmoni wanted 300 guests and a venue and a photographer whose work appeared in magazines. Taiju held the line. Isi did not ask him to. She stated her preference once and left it with him. The holding was entirely his. Kang Kyung-ja attended. She sat in the front row in pale gray with an expression so precisely calibrated that it communicated everything and admitted nothing. A woman who showed up to important events because her presence was itself a form of control, and whose attendance did not constitute endorsement and was not designed to be mistaken for it. Essie shook her hand at the reception, looked at her directly, not aggressively, not with the performance of someone establishing territory. Just directly, with the clear steadiness of a woman taking the true measure of something. Long enough for Halmoni to understand that this woman she had not selected for her grandson was not going to look away. Halmoni looked away first. Essie filed it. Not as a victory, as information. This woman loves her family and has already decided I am a problem to be managed. That is not an enemy. That is just a woman who has built a world according to her own design and does not yet know I am not going to fit into it quietly. Neither of them knew, standing there with champagne and careful smiles, that there was a version of this story that ended in something like respect, and a version that ended in a legal letter in a clear plastic sleeve, and that the distance between those two versions was not yet determined. The first year of the marriage was real. Isi says this without the automatic qualifier that people usually attach. Not mostly real or real enough, or real in the ways that mattered. Real. Fully. The actual substance of two people choosing each other in the ordinary dailiness of a shared life, which is the only place where the choice ever actually gets made. They disagreed about things and said so, which was itself an intimacy. They learned each other's edges, not the edges people show on dates or in the good months of courtship, but the actual ones, the sensitivities that do not come with explanations attached, the habits that are not charming once they are daily. They learned these things and they accommodated them, not perfectly, genuinely. She was happy. She uses that word carefully. She was happy in the specific, grounded, built not gifted way of someone who has made something real with their own hands and can feel the realness of it when they press against it. Taiju was trying, not perfectly, genuinely. The difference matters. Perfect is a performance. Genuine is a direction. He was moving in the right direction and she could feel it, and she held on to it, and that first year, it was more than enough. Then the second year came. The distance did not arrive with an announcement. It came like weather, gradual, atmospheric, the kind of change you notice in retrospect because, in the moment, it always feels like it might just be a hard week, a difficult month, a season about to turn. It was not a season. And by the time Isi understood what she was watching, it had already gone somewhere she could not follow. The late nights came first. Not alarming in themselves. Kang Taeju ran a major division of one of South Korea's largest conglomerates, and late nights had always been part of the texture of that life. But these were qualitatively different from the first year's late nights. The first year, he came home tired but present. He came home to her. These new late nights, he came home somewhere else. He came home with something already decided behind his eyes, some internal door already closed, and the tiredness was not the clean tiredness of hard work, but the complicated tiredness of a man carrying something he had decided not to share with anyone. Then the drinking. Not dramatic. Incremental. A glass of whiskey that became two, that became a bottle in the cabinet that was replaced more often than the arithmetic of their social life explained. The kind of drinking that disguises itself as unwinding, that looks from the outside like a man decompressing and looks from the inside, up close, like a man using something to stand between himself and a feeling he has not named to anyone, slow, disguised as normal. The kind of thing you have to be watching carefully to track. She was watching carefully. She tracked it. And what she tracked frightened her, because she understood what it meant. He was managing a feeling he was not telling her about. A large one. The kind that required chemical management to face each day. She did not confront it. Not because she was afraid, but because she was strategic. She understood that confronting it before he was ready to name it would give him the option to defend it rather than examine it. And defending it was the thing she most needed to avoid. So she watched. She created openings. She made the space around him as safe as she knew how to make it. And she waited for him to walk through. He did not walk through. The silences got longer. Not hostile. Absent. There is a critical difference between a person who is silent in anger and a person who has gone somewhere you cannot follow. Taiju was the second kind. He sat across from her at dinner with the lights on, and his mouth forming words and none of it arriving because he was not in the room. He was somewhere inside himself where the KH group pressure and his grandmother's voice and whatever lived in the locked room of him were all running at once, and what she received was the surface, just the managed surface, the part of him that knew the performance of being present even when the reality of it had gone somewhere else entirely. She started to feel the shape of what she was not being told. Not lies. Taiju did not lie with his mouth. He was meticulous about this, about not saying untrue things. She had built on it in the first year without fully understanding that there is more than one way to keep a person outside your real life. You can lie. Or you can simply never open the door and call it privacy, and let the person standing outside decide for themselves what it means. She was standing outside a lot of doors. She stopped reaching for him, not in anger, in self-preservation. She had spent too many years building a self that did not require another person's involvement to function, and she was not going to dismantle that self by chasing a man who was retreating, because chasing a retreating person teaches them that retreating works. She had learned this truth somewhere in her 20s, and she had not forgotten it. She kept the life running. With the precision of a woman who had been keeping things running since she was 14 and had long since stopped requiring acknowledgement for it. She went to work. She came home. She cooked. She kept the apartment and the calendar and the obligations all moving forward, and she watched him from across the distance that had grown between them, and she gave him room, and she waited. The night he slept in the second bedroom she did not find out until morning. That is the part she has never told anyone, not even Abena. She had fallen asleep waiting for him. Not deliberately. She had not sat up holding vigil, had not watched the clock with the particular dread of a woman counting hours. She had fallen asleep the way you fall asleep when you are exhausted from carrying something heavy and your body simply overrules you. And sometime in the hours she was not conscious, he had come home, walked past their bedroom door, and chosen the other one. She woke at 5:47 a.m. to an empty side of the bed that had been warm when she fell asleep, and was cold now. She lay there for a long time without moving. She looked at the ceiling. She listened to the particular silence of an apartment where someone else is present but not with you. She did not get up and knock on the other door. She thought about it. She lay there and she thought, I could get up. I could knock. I could ask what is happening in that room that made this door the wrong one. She thought about all of those things, and then she thought, and if I do, what does he say? What is the version of that conversation that ends with the two of us on the same side of something? She could not find that version. She got up at 6. She made coffee. She heard him moving in the second bedroom. The specific sounds of a person waking in a space not designed for sleeping. The disorientation of it. the creak of the guest bed. And she stood at the kitchen counter and drank her coffee. And when he came out, she said good morning, and he said good morning, and neither of them mentioned it. They ate breakfast at the same table and did not mention it. She went to work and did not mention it. She came home and he was already asleep, in their bedroom this time, which meant she was meant to understand that the previous night was an anomaly, a bad night, nothing requiring discussion. And she stood in the doorway and looked at him and felt the specific chill of a woman who has just understood something she cannot ununderstand. It was not a season, it was a direction. And she had been so focused on giving him room to find his way back that she had not noticed how far he had already walked. 3 weeks after that morning, on a Thursday at 7 a.m., standing in her bathroom, she found out she was pregnant. She sat with it for 4 days, not because she was uncertain, because what she was about to walk into required a version of herself she had to find first. And when she was finally ready, when she walked into that living room and said his name, what came out of his mouth before she could finish her second sentence was something that changed the entire shape of everything that followed. She almost told him in the hallway. That is the thing about 4 days of practicing steadiness. It works right up until the moment it doesn't. She had been steady on the subway, steady crossing the lobby of their building, steady in the elevator. And then the apartment door opened and she smelled the specific smell of their home, the coffee he had made that morning, the particular warmth of rooms that belonged to 2 people. And something in her chest lurched sideways. She stood in the hallway with the test in her bag and her hand on the doorframe, and she thought, I am not ready. She thought, I thought I was ready, and I am not ready. She thought, 4 days was not enough. She needed more time. She needed another week. She needed to be standing on ground that did not feel like it was tilting. She stood there for 45 seconds. She counted them. Then she thought, easy. You have been ready for things your entire life before you felt ready. You were ready at 17 with a scholarship letter on a kitchen table. You were ready at 24 with one suitcase in a city that did not know you yet. Ready is not a feeling. Ready is a decision. And you have already made it. She straightened. She walked into the living room. He was on the couch. The bourbon was on the table, not the cabinet where it lived, which meant it had already been visited once this evening, and she clocked this in the first second, and filed it, and did not let it change her direction. She sat down across from him. She said his name. He looked at her with the flat, somewhere else quality she had learned to read over 2 years, and in that moment she felt the specific vertigo of a woman who is prepared for a conversation and is now looking at a person who may not be present enough to have it. She felt it and she swallowed it and she kept going because stopping was not available. She said, "There is something I need to tell you. It is important." And then his mouth opened. And what came out of it was not anything she had prepared for, because she had prepared for denial, for silence, for anger, for the face of a man receiving news that changes everything. She had not prepared for the flat, preloaded voice of a man reciting a story that had already been written for him. He said, "I think I already know what this is." She went still. Not the practiced stillness, the involuntary kind. The kind that happens when your body receives information before your mind does and simply stops while the understanding catches up. He kept talking. He said things about timing, about strategy, about what his family's legal team had discussed with him as a possibility. He said it calmly. He said it without cruelty. He said it the way you recite something you have been given rather than something you have thought. And she sat across from him, and she felt something crack open in her chest. Not break. Crack. The difference matters. A break is an ending. A crack is what happens when something that was sealed for a long time suddenly has air in it. Cold air. The kind that comes from a direction you were not expecting. His grandmother had been in this room before her. She did not know this with certainty, but she felt the shape of it the way she had always felt the shape of things. Before the words arrived, before the evidence was assembled, someone had prepared him. Someone had taken the most important sentence she had ever needed to say and had gotten here first and twisted it into something else entirely. She told him to stop. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She would think about this later. The gap between what was happening inside her and what her body produced. She told him she was not there to manipulate anything. She told him she found out 4 days ago. She told him he was her husband, and she had believed that meant something, and she had wanted him to hear this from her. To look at her when she told him. He looked at her. One moment. An opening. She saw it. The possibility of him putting down whatever had been handed to him before she arrived, and choosing to actually hear her. It was there. It was real. She reached toward it. He looked away first. He said, "I don't think this is the right time." And that was that. Essie stood, picked up her bag, walked to the door and closed it behind her with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had promised herself years ago that she would never slam a door she might need to walk back through. She stood in the hallway for 3 minutes, long enough to be sure her legs were steady. Then she went downstairs to the lobby, sat on a bench near the entrance, and called Abina. 4 words. He didn't hear me. She did not go back upstairs. Not that night. Not any night after. She stayed with Abina that night and the 2 nights after. On the 4th day, she signed the lease in Mapogu. On the 5th day, she started building. This is what Essie did with devastation. She turned it immediately into construction. She did not sit with the rubble. She sorted it, identified what was still useful, and started putting something new together from what remained. It was not a coping mechanism. It was a philosophy. You keep going or you stop. And stopping had never been available to her. She told no one about the pregnancy except Abena, not because she was ashamed, because she was not going to give anyone information they had not earned the right to hold. She was building first. She would decide what to do with the information when the building was far enough along to be stable. She was 32 days into the building when the letter arrived. She opened it at her kitchen table with Abina across from her, because Abina had the specific gift of making the presence of bad news survivable just by being in the same room with it. She read it once, then again. Then she set it on the table between them, and they both sat with it for a moment the way you sit with something that has confirmed what you suspected but hoped was wrong. K.H. Group Legal Division. Official letterhead. 4 paragraphs of careful legal language that translated in plain terms to this: stop trying to contact him. Any further personal contact, direct or indirect, will be treated as harassment and addressed through all available legal channels. Govern yourself accordingly. Not his signature. His grandmother's lawyers. Halmoni had known about the game pregnancy. She had found out somehow. To this day, Essie does not know from whom, and the not knowing is a specific wound that reopens sometimes in the quiet. The question of which person in her life had been close enough and connected enough to pass that information to the Kang family legal team. Someone had. And Halmoni, upon receiving that information, had not told her grandson, had not said, "Taeju, your wife is pregnant, you need to speak to her," had instead instructed the lawyers, had a letter drafted and sent, designed to ensure that Essenam would be too frightened, too legally exposed, too isolated to attempt contact again. She thought she was ending it. She thought a letter on KH Group letterhead, arriving at the apartment of a woman alone in Seoul with no family nearby and a pregnancy she had told almost no one about, would be sufficient. She thought the weight of that letterhead would do what the weight of the Kang family had always done: make the inconvenient thing go away quietly. She did not know who she was dealing with. Essie put the letter in a clear plastic sleeve that same afternoon, labeled it with the date, filed it in a folder at the back of her desk drawer labeled simply, Evidence. Then she went to her next prenatal appointment, alone, on the subway. Because she was a woman who had been getting herself places since she was 14 years old, and a pregnancy did not change the logistics of that. She built everything alone, every appointment, every class, every night. And there was one specific Tuesday in her 7th month that she has never spoken about. Not to Abena, not to anyone. Until now. Birth preparation class, a community center 3 stops from Mapogu, the kind of fluorescent-lit room that exists in every city in the world for exactly this purpose. Plastic chairs arranged in a circle, a laminated poster on the wall about breathing techniques, an instructor moving through the room with the particular gentleness of someone who has learned that the people in this circle are managing more than they can say. Essie was the only person in the room without a partner. She had known this would be the case. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, by deciding in advance what her response would be, by choosing her face before she walked through the door. She was not going to be the woman who needed to be handled. She was going to be the woman who was managing fine. She had decided this on the subway. The first part of the class was straightforward: breathing techniques, pain management. The physiology of labor explained in terms that were almost interesting if you approached them as information rather than as something that was going to happen to your body in approximately 8 weeks. She took notes. She was the only person taking notes. The couples around her were too busy being coupled. The hand-holding, the shared glances, the particular intimacy of 2 people who were frightened in the same direction. She took notes. The instructor asked everyone to practice the breathing with their partner. Maintain eye contact. Breathe in together and out together. 2 nervous systems finding the same rhythm. The couples turned toward each other. The room became pairs. Essie sat in her chair. The instructor saw her. She had a kind face and she crossed the room without making it a moment, which Essie respected, and she sat in the empty chair beside her and said, "Would you like to practice with me?" And Essie said yes. And they breathed together, in for 4 counts, out for 6. And the instructor had a steady, unhurried presence, and Essie matched her rhythm. And for the 4 minutes the exercise lasted, she focused only on her breath and the count, and nothing else. Then the exercise ended and the couples unclasped, and the room shifted back into general noise, and the instructor moved on, and Essie sat with her notebook in her lap, and she felt something move through her that she was not going to name in that room. She named it on the subway home. Sitting in the orange plastic seat with her hands on her stomach and Seoul moving past the windows in the dark. She named it the specific grief of a woman who had done nothing wrong and was doing it alone anyway. She gave it its 4 stops. She let it have them completely. Then the train reached Mapogu and she got off and walked home. And she went to her desk and she opened the folder at the back of the drawer, and she looked at the letter in its clear sleeve and she thought, not yet. But one day, she closed the folder. She made dinner. She kept going. Nellu arrived on a Wednesday morning in October, 13 months after the last time Essie had slept in the apartment in Hanamdong. She came into the world in a hospital room in Mapogu, with Abena's hand in hers and nobody else's, and the sound of Seoul going about its Wednesday business outside the window, entirely indifferent to the extraordinary thing happening on the 4th floor. Essie looked at her daughter's face. Hanul Aqua, sky, born on Wednesday. She had both parents visible in her. Her father's eyes, dark and steady and looking at the world with the full, unfiltered attention of someone who has not yet learned to manage their reactions. Her mother's mouth. Both of them written into one face, the evidence of a story that was not finished. Essie called her Nellu. She held her against her chest and she made a promise. Quietly, to the top of her daughter's head. in the specific way you make promises you are absolutely certain you will keep. We are going to be all right. Both of us. I promise you. She kept the letter. For 11 months, she built. She worked. She raised Nellu with Abina's help and the occasional support of 2 women from her floor who had children, and recognized the look of a person managing alone and offered what they could. She did not date. She did not reach out. She did not spend her evenings constructing scenarios. She built. She accumulated ground under her feet, solid, owned, not dependent on anyone else's architecture or anyone else's name. At the end of 11 months, she looked at what she had built and she decided it was enough. Not perfect. Enough. Enough to walk into a room with full information and say what needed to be said and leave regardless of what happened next, because what happened next could not touch what she had constructed. She called Abena. She said, "I'm going in." Abena said, "I'll drive you." Essie said, "I know you will." She packed the document wallet the night before. Divorce papers, every page signed, every tab labeled. The sealed letter in its clear sleeve, 11 months old, pristine, preserved with the care of someone who understood that evidence kept its value only as long as its integrity was maintained. She packed it all with the methodical focus of someone who had been preparing for this morning for 11 months, without ever letting herself fully call it preparation. She fed Nellu at 5 in the morning. She dressed her in a soft white onesie and strapped her into the burnt orange carrier. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at what she saw. A woman. Specific, particular, belonging to herself. Not to the Kang family. Not to a legal letter. Not to the version of her that someone had decided to file away as a liability. Herself. She picked up the document wallet. She walked to the door. She opened it. She took the subway to Yoido. She crossed the marble lobby. She pressed 39 and stood in the elevator with her daughter against her chest, and she did not rehearse what she was going to say, because the documents would do the talking. The letter would do the rest. The elevator opened on the 39th floor, and the first thing she felt was the air. Cooled, controlled. The specific temperature of rooms where important things are decided. And she stepped into it, and she stood for 1 second in the corridor. With the document wallet in her hand, and Nellu warm against her chest, and Seoul 40 stories below, doing what Seoul always did, which was continue entirely regardless of what any individual person was about to do inside it. She thought, "This is the moment you have been building toward for 11 months. She thought, "Either he is the man you married or he is not. Either the letter changes something or it doesn't. Either you walk into this room and something shifts, or you walk out of it and you go home and you keep building, and that is still a life. That is still a life you made, and it is a good one." She thought all of this in approximately 3 seconds. Then she stopped thinking and started walking. The corridor was long. The boardroom doors were at the end of it. Double doors, dark wood. The kind that communicate before you touch them that what is on the other side of them is serious. She had been in rooms behind doors like this before. She had built herself specifically for rooms like this. She was not a woman who stood outside doors. She put both hands flat against them. She pushed. The doors swung open and the room beyond came into view all at once. The long table, the glass walls, the city of Seoul burning white in the windows, 11 people seated and standing and mid-sentence and mid-thought and mid-everything. And every single one of them stopped. Not gradually, not one by one. All of them at once, as if the room itself had taken a breath and held it. The silence was total. In the middle of it, at the head of the table, Kang Taeju turned. He saw her. Then he saw what she was carrying, and the expression that crossed his face in that moment. In front of his board, in front of his grandmother's representative, in front of every carefully positioned person in that carefully constructed room, was the last thing anyone there expected from a man who had spent his entire career making sure no room ever saw him unguarded. It was not anger. It was not guilt. It was recognition. The specific, devastating recognition of a man looking at something he had not known was missing and understanding, in the space of a single breath, exactly how long it had been gone. On episode 2, the boardroom empties, the doors close, and for the first time in 14 months, Esinam and Kang Taeju are alone in a room with everything between them on the table. What he says in the first 60 seconds, what she does not say back, and the moment that tells her, with complete and devastating clarity, that the man she walked in ready to fight has already stopped fighting against her and started fighting for her instead. Subscribe now so you don't miss episode 2. And drop a comment before you go. Would you have kept that letter for 11 months and walked back in? Or would you have closed the door and never looked back? There is no wrong answer. I need to know where you stand.